The snow came in the night, and she came with it. She had been running for 2 days, and the cold had moved into her feet the way cold does when it means to stay, and the lined shack sat at the edge of the pines like something the land had forgotten. No smoke from the chimney. No horses tied out front. She did not stop to decide. She crossed the last open ground at a crouch and pushed the door with her shoulder and went in. Dark inside. The smell of coal oil and dried leather and something that had been cooked a long time ago. She stood until her eyes found the shapes, a narrow bunk against the far wall, a stove gone cold, a table with one chair, a bridle hung on a nail by the door. She went to the bunk and pulled back the blanket and got in with her boots on and pulled the blanket to her chin and lay still. Her feet were the color of a winter sky. She tucked them against herself and waited for the feeling to come back, and it did come back, and it was not pleasant. Outside, the wind worked at the corners of the shack, and the snow drove against the single window in waves. She listened to it. She had not slept in 2 days, and she did not sleep now. She lay with her knife in her hand under the blanket and watched the door. He came in an hour before dawn. She heard the horse first, and then his boots on the step, and then the door, and she was sitting up with the knife out before he had the lamp lit. And when the light came up, she saw him clearly, a tall man, lean through the middle, trail-worn and dusted with snow from his hat to his spurs. He saw her and he stopped. They looked at each other across the small room. He was not a young man, but he was not old either. The kind of face the country makes when it is finished with you. He looked at the knife and he looked at her face, and then he looked at her hands where they came out from the blanket cuff, and his face changed in a way she had learned to read in men, not desire, not anger, something quieter than either. He looked at her wrists. He looked a long time. The brands were old enough to be scars, but not old enough to be forgotten, and she did not lower the knife, and she did not cover her wrists, and she did not look away from him. He set his saddlebags down on the table. He took off his hat and set it on the chair. He went to the stove and built a fire without asking her anything, and when the fire caught, he put a pot of water on and cut jerky into a tin cup and set the cup on the table edge nearest her. Then he sat on the floor with his back against the wall on the far side of the room and pulled his hat over his eyes. He did not speak. He did not look at her again. She sat with the knife in her hand and watched the tin cup and listened to the fire find itself inside the stove, and outside the snow drove on against the window, and the wind said what it said, and she sat there, and she was not warm yet, but she was out of it, and she did not lower the knife for a long time. Eventually, she took the jerky from the cup one piece at a time and ate it. A tin cup hung on a nail near the stove, and she fixed her eyes on it when the shaking came. The shaking was not cold by then. The shaking was something else that she did not name. She did not sleep, but she stayed, and outside the dark went from black to gray to white, and the snow did not stop. Morning came gray, and the snow did not stop. He was awake before her, which she knew because she had not slept. He built the fire up and melted snow and made something from a cloth sack that turned into a kind of porridge, and he put it in a bowl and set it on the table the same way he'd set the jerky close to her, handle turned her way. Then he went outside. She ate. When he came back in, he brought snow on his boots, and he scraped them at the threshold, and she watched him from the bunk. He went to the window and looked out a long time, and she saw his shoulders settle in a way that was not good. "Rider coming," he said. She was up before he finished the words. She did not go to the window. She went to the wall beside it and put her eye to a gap in the boards where the chinking had dried and cracked, and she could see the approach through the pines, one rider first and then two more behind. She knew the lead rider by the horse, a big red roan with a blaze that ran sideways like a scar across its nose. Dill Prout. Her stomach did the thing it always did when she saw that horse, which was to pull itself tight and go very still the way an animal goes still when something is hunting. "He's from Abel Goss's ranch," she said. She said it flat. She did not say the rest. The cowboy, she did not know his name, looked at her once and then went to the door and went out onto the step and pulled the door behind him. She pressed her eye back to the gap. Prout stopped his roan in the yard and the two cowhands flanked back. He was a thick-made man, and he wore his hat low, and he had a way of sitting a horse that said the horse was property like everything else. The cowboy leaned in the doorway with his arms crossed. "Seen a woman," Prout said, "Apache, Goss's property." The cowboy looked out at the tree line. He did not look at Prout. He worked something between his back teeth. "Ain't seen nobody," he said. "Storm came in, I been inside." Prout looked at the shack. He looked at it a long time. "She's dangerous," he said. The cowboy nodded like this was interesting information. He was filing away for later. "I'll keep my eyes open," he said. Prout looked at the shack one more time and then he turned the roan, and the three of them went back through the pines, and the sound of them faded into the snow sound. The cowboy came back inside and shut the door and said nothing. She moved away from the wall. He went to the stove and poured himself coffee and stood with his back to her drinking it. "Property," she said. He didn't turn around. He drank his coffee. "He's got a bill of sale," she said. She said it to see what he would do with it. Men did things with information like that, calculated with it, revised. He set the cup down. "Paper don't make a thing true," he said. That was all. He went to the window and looked out at where the riders had been. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at the bridle hung by the door. A good bridle, worked leather. Somebody had put time into it. She looked at it and she breathed and she thought about the way he had said paper don't make a thing true without turning around, as if it were not even worth the effort of facing her to say. That evening, he set dry socks on the bunk beside her and walked away. She picked them up. They were thick wool, the kind that cost something. She turned them in her hands, then she put them on. She ate everything he cooked that night and did not ask herself why. The mare was foaling, and Nora went into the small stable without being asked. She had heard it through the shack wall in the dark, not quite a sound. More a feeling of something laboring in the cold, and she had pulled her boots on and gone out before she thought about weather too. The stable was linta built against the back of the shack, 3 horses in the cold and the mare down in the far corner and not right. The cowboy was already there with the lantern. "She's been at it too long," he said. He was kneeling beside the mare and his face in the lantern light was the face of a man who has watched animals die and not made his peace with it. Nora crouched and looked. She had seen this before. Her mother had shown her this. There was a way the body organized itself around an animal in trouble that she did not need to think about, it simply happened. "Her hands are smaller," she said. He looked at her, she met his eyes. He moved back. She worked for a long time in the straw and the cold, and the mare was not easy about it. And there was a point when she thought the foal was lost, and she pressed past that point and worked. And the cowboy held the mare's head and spoke to her in a low voice that was almost not language, just sound. And the straw was dark before it was over, and then it was over and the foal was in the world. A stud colt, dark bay. He lay in the straw and looked at nothing with new eyes. The mare turned and found him, and the lantern light made everything amber and close. Nora sat back on her heels, and she was shaking, and not from cold. The cowboy crouched beside her. "You knew what to do," he said. She looked at the foal. "My mother," she said. She stopped. She picked at a piece of straw stuck to her sleeve, pulled it off, dropped it. "She showed me horses," Nora said. Her name was Daisy. She had not said the name since the men from Goss's ranch had taken her 3 years before, and the name came out of her mouth whole, unchanged, exactly as it had always been, and that was the thing she had not expected. "Daisy," he said. He said it right. He had a slight emphasis on the first part, and it was right, and she did not know how he knew to say it that way. She looked at the foal. The foal was trying the idea of its legs. He handed her a cloth to clean her hands, and she cleaned them, and he took it back, and they stayed in the stable while the mare worked on the colt, and the lantern turned, and outside the wind came in off the plains with nothing to stop it for 100 miles. When they went back inside, she did not go to the far side of the room. She sat at the table, and he made coffee, and neither of them said anything, and his arm brushed hers once when he set the cup down, and she did not move away from it. The straw was still on her sleeve when she lay down. She did not pick it off. Prout came back, and he did not come alone. 3 riders this time, and a 4th she did not recognize sitting a gray mule at the back with a rifle across his saddle. They came out of the pines mid-morning, and the cowboy was outside splitting wood when they came, and she saw his hand stop on the axe handle. He said her name once, not loud. She was at the window already. He set the axe down and went to the door and opened it, and she was behind him, and she had the foaling knife from the stable in her hand. It was not a long knife, but it was sharp, the kind of sharp that happens when someone keeps a thing out of respect for what it's for. Prout stopped his roan in the yard. He had papers in his hand. He held them up. "Bill of sale," he said. "Goss's property. Hand her over and there's no trouble here, Burkett." Burkett, she had not known his name until then. Burkett stood in the doorway. He had not reached for the rifle inside the door. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, and he looked at Prout the way a man looks at weather, present, patient, not afraid of it. "She ain't property," Burkett said. Prout looked at the papers. He looked at Burkett. He smiled the way men smile when they have decided something. The 2 cowhands spread wide, and the man on the mule raised his rifle, and Prout came off his horse with the papers in one hand, and his pistol clearing leather, and Burkett stepped forward to meet him, and Prout brought the pistol butt across his brow, and Burkett went to one knee in the snow. She moved. She went past Burkett, and she was not thinking about anything except the hand that held the pistol, and she drove the foaling knife into Prout's right hand where it met the gun, and she felt the bones there give under the blade, and Prout made a sound that was not a word and dropped the pistol and staggered back. The cowhands went for their iron. Nora stood over the pistol in the snow and looked at the 2 cowhands, and she did not pick it up, and she did not back away. The man on the mule had not moved his rifle. Prout was bent over his hand, his face white as the ground. "I'll have the law," he said. Burkett was up. There was blood on his brow, and he was up. "Law's in Cimarron," Burkett said. 60 miles. Ride careful on that hand." Prout looked at him. Prout looked at her. His face was a thing she did not mind seeing. They rode out, all 4 of them, back into the pines, and the sound of them went away into the wind. Burkett stood in the yard with blood tracking down the side of his face, and she stood beside him. One of Prout's gloves was in the snow between them. Nobody had thought to pick it up. He pressed the back of his hand to his brow and looked at it. She turned and went inside and came back with the cloth they had used in the stable and pressed it to the cut. He let her. He stood very still and looked out at the tree line and let her press the cloth to his head, and she could feel him working to stay still, and she worked carefully. He took the cloth from her and held it himself. "Thank you," he said. She went inside. After a moment he followed and shut the door. He sat at the table, and she found his needle, and the sinew thread he kept in a tin by the window, and she stood behind him, and closed the cut with 3 stitches the way her mother had shown her, pulling the thread through with the flat authority of someone who has done it before and will not be careless with the pain of it. He did not make a sound. When she was done, she tied the thread and cut it and stepped back. He reached up and touched it with one finger. Prout's glove was still in the snow outside. She could see it through the window, already half covered. The snow was coming again, quiet and indifferent, and it was covering everything Prout had brought into the yard. Nora did not move to the far side of the room. She pulled the second chair to the table and sat beside him, and the fire in the stove made its sound, and the snow came down, and the new colt in the stable made a small noise that carried through the wall, thin and new and alive.